is just a better, more permanent mechanism to do all the things that we've been doing in the past. And I think, given that all 3 web browsers have implemented do not track capabilities in the browser, if the only thing that we get is that the do not track header is a replacement for the existing cookie opt-outs, where the server, when they receive it, just does the exact same thing as what they're currently doing with the opt-outs, I think we're already in a better place because consumers have better control. And so obviously there are other questions, and I would go above and beyond that in terms of what the policy should be when the server receives the header. But I think from a technical standpoint, the do not track train has left the station, and that that from a technical matter, it's just a better technology to help empower consumers.
I want to ask Andy where consumers are. I think maybe there's consensus that consumers don't know what's going on. Do you think they don't know what's going on, or are they expressing their preferences implicitly one way or another? Do you see anything in your work that shows that they want the kind of deal that Berin and Ryan suggest is okay? Where are they? What do we know?
I think it's easy for us, like on the panel and most of the audience, to look at a web page, and when you look at it, you see advertisement, you see search box, you see all types of different things, and some people just have a feeling, this isn't part of the website, it's something else. I think there's a lot of people who are busy professionals who just want to get on the web and browse, which is what kind of i9 is all about. It's about websites and just getting on the net and doing your business. And I think that a lot of people don't think about those types of issues at all. I like the consumer studies that we've seen.
I'll let you jump in. I'm going to ask you a question. But go on.
Go ahead.
No, I'm not going to jump in.
No, I think if you tell a user what's going on when they visit a website, many users will say, I think that's creepy, or other users will say, I'm fine with that. I love ads. I love ads that are relevant to what I want to buy. And I think there are preferences that users have, but I think we're still a little ahead of the curve in terms of what users think of when they actually go to websites, whether or not they're conscious of what goes on.
FTC put out a report recently. You all think about what consumers think all the time. What's the inside dope?
Well, the question of what consumers think or understand in these settings is really an empirical question. And there are some studies on this that, at the risk of overgeneralization, I think tend to show a few things. One is that consumers don't want to bother with learning all of the details. Two is that consumers think that they're better protected by the technology and the law than they actually are. One of the reasons why there is sometimes less furor about practices is that consumers think they're already illegal or already impossible. And I think the more, often in the discussion about this, you'll hear people saying that, well, if we could just explain to consumers what we do with their data, how we gather and what we do, that would be okay. And to me, it depends. This is like the company that makes hot dogs saying that if we could just explain to people what's in the hot dogs, they would be happy to eat more of them. Well, that might or might not be true, depending on what's actually in the hot dogs.
So please, Jim, again, Hayek, I don't want to do nothing. There's plenty to do, right? So I'm not arguing against do not track. Just want to make that very clear, right? I'm arguing against the ways in which this could go and some of the philosophical underpinnings behind people who are pushing regulatory or legislative solutions. But this point about what consumers know, what they want, that these polls, this is really, really important. So in the law, there are two concepts that are very, very commonly confused. One is to ask, well, what do consumers actually know, and to base expectations on that. And the second is to ask instead, not what everybody actually knows, but what a certain sort of the rational, somewhat informed, reasonable person would know. Those are very different questions. And I think that we make a great mistake if we confuse rational ignorance on the part of most consumers, right? This is exactly the point that was made earlier, that people, they don't want to know how the engine in their car works or how the credit card system works. They just want to get through their day, and that's fine. The question is, how do you build a user empowerment tool that lets people choose, who are privacy sensitive, something that works for them, that lets them do that not at a cost, right? So that it's not free. It is a disincentive. There's a reason for them not to turn the dial all the way up to block. And then the key part here is, if you look at polls and you simply ask people, are you concerned about your privacy? Do you object to the following practices? And you conclude from that all of those practices are objectionable and should be banned, you're missing the key point about trade-offs, because that never ever will be properly revealed in a poll. There's no way you can have a real-world trade-off.
I want to ask Berin, I want to ask Ryan to chime in on that if he's willing, because you've written a little bit about rational ignorance, and it was fascinating when I read this idea that people might not be paying attention because it might not matter. Sorry to say that here. Everybody's supposed to care 100%, right? But it might not matter. What about rational ignorance?
It might not matter. In fact, it might be a very good thing that, in some respects, that people don't spend lots of time learning about privacy, because time is scarce, and the world is full of risks, many of which are far greater than the relatively small threat that the data that's being collected about you by third parties will somehow harm you. People often don't understand exactly who's tracking them or why. And the reason they don't is because they haven't taken the time to educate themselves. And one of the biggest reasons they haven't taken the time is because they don't perceive subconsciously that it's worth their time, because there are many other greater risks. The current status quo with respect to how information is shared and collected and used on the internet is in large part the product of lots of people blissfully ignorant about how tracking works. When someone hears you're actually being tracked by a third party everywhere you go on the internet, they may be scared and think it's creepy. Maybe if they spend another year or many hours reading about it, they would realize that it's actually a fairly trivial risk and that the trade-off is worth it. But it's not necessarily the case that we should just assume that if consumers don't understand what's going on, that we're going to get an arrangement that is bad for society and bad for privacy and bad for consumer welfare.
There is outrage on my left. Go ahead.
So we should just give consumers choice and then let them decide, right?
Sounds like a gotcha question.
Again, nobody here is arguing against user empowerment.
Let me go to Chris.
Harlan, go quick.
I mean, the time is scarce argument sounds like an argument for do not track, right? Users shouldn't have to invest lots of time learning how to defend themselves. There are lots of different technologies. There's lots of different tools. It's probably inefficient for everyone to try to learn that. And so I think that's the beauty of do not track, is that it's a one-click, one-stop shop to defend against all of these activities. And so yes, it's about giving users easy control over these nefarious.
But Harlan, this is the crux of the debate. If it's a one-stop click, that I applaud Firefox for going out and doing this, Mozilla for doing that. But I think the way that they've rolled it out in the current iteration is a mistake, because it is a one-stop purports to block tracking everywhere. It doesn't actually do that, as we know. But I think that fundamentally is not the kind of user empowerment that we want. So really today what you're hearing is a debate between two forms of user empowerment. The folks over here on the left, I think at least on the far left, are in principle arguing for, I'm not lumping it in here, are in principle arguing for a form of user empowerment that is, go to this place, check one box, and block all tracking because tracking is bad and data is dangerous. And instead what I and I think Ryan are essentially arguing for is that ultimately what needs to happen in an evolved way, I'm not going to dictate the design of this, but is some tool that is more granular than that is tailored towards real problems, and that is, in many ways, what's admirable about what Microsoft has done is that it's not that sort of one-size-fits-all blocking. It actually is intended to give people a diversity of options that reflect their real privacy preferences. And I think this is where Mozilla is heading, which is good, but today I'm not thrilled about it.
If you're up close, you can see the vein on Berin's forehead, and I can see the red in Chris's eyes.
All right, sorry. So if you listen to what Berin's saying, right, what he's describing is a desire to make it so that consumers have an option, but it's not too easy to use. Right? No. I guess my question back to Berin is, how much time should consumers have to spend to enable this option? And before you jump in, let me say that Microsoft has helped you in the past, right? So the previous versions of Internet Explorer required that you re-enable their tracking protection feature each time you started the browser. They made it so that the preference was not sticky. Not only was it not on by default, but you had to re-enable it every time. So is 5 minutes for every browsing session, is that the right cost? Is 5 hours spent downloading third-party plugins the right amount of time? What is the right amount?
So let's back up one step before I answer your questions and recognize that what we're really talking about here is creating a market, right? So when Ryan was saying that we have an implicit quid pro quo today, what he really means is that there is in economic terms, there is no exact structure to the market. There is no explicit negotiation. It's only that if you are privacy sensitive, you can use tools that exist today to opt out. And essentially what we're moving towards is, the flip side of do not track is basically to say, I prefer to pay. Or I prefer to see more ads that are less relevant, but they're more annoying, or something like that. So that negotiation is going to have to evolve for this to be scalable, which is what I meant earlier. And what I'm ultimately saying is that you can't expect this tool to work if there's no reason for the user not to turn the dial all the way up to block. If you give them something that simply says, I don't want any tracking at all, and there's no cost to that, people are not going to make a rational trade-off. They're going to simply check the box because it's easy, or because, as the Europeans want, it's checked by default in all browsers.
Harlan, you.
I think so to clarify the technology.
I'm not sure whether you're clapping for me or against me.
That makes no sense, you people.
To clarify just the technology just a little bit, I think the basic use of the do not track header for the lay user, for my mom, would be the binary setting. It'd be I don't want to be tracked by third parties, or I do. I think for advanced users, you could actually use it in very much the same way as tracking protection lists, where you could have granular settings about when to send the header and when not to send the header. You could set it only to certain third parties, or only to certain third parties when they're on other first-party sites that you can specify. And so in some ways, the header is just as granular as TPLs. It's just that for the lay user who wants the default protection, can just turn it on for all third parties. The same thing could be done with TPLs, where it blocks all requests to third parties. And so in terms of granularity, both the tracking protection lists and the do not track header actually offer very much the same.
So just to be clear, we need to distinguish here between the header, and Harlan is exactly right. Okay, header can be used in a granular fashion in that way, and the user interface, which is to which websites is the header sent. And my complaint is not necessarily about the header, although it might be that the header doesn't well facilitate the kind of transaction that needs to take place. My complaint is first and foremost about the interface, because if the interface is primarily block or don't block, that's not where we want to go. And I think that's not where Mozilla is heading, to their credit. I think they're moving towards a more granular thing that allows people to express their preferences better.
Mozilla's going to offer granular settings for advanced users, but Harlan's mother and my mother are not going to want to spend 2 hours configuring their browser preferences. And I think what you're arguing, I think what you're saying is the default should be something really complex, so that technically trained users will spend those 2 hours figuring out how to do it, but it'll overwhelm the average user, and they'll stick with the default, which is to allow.
So hang on, I'm a little confused. Are you saying that someone should stop Mozilla from doing that?